Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Vorkosigan's Saga, Ethan of Athos, chapters 1 and 2. In these chapters, we have landed on a new planet in a new POV. Everything is brand new and even weirder than usual. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Brett for commissioning this episode. Brett, what's up? If you're out there listening, thank you so much. I appreciate you a lot. So, I was not ready for us to be in a completely new POV, folks, at all. And I'm going to go ahead and assume, because the book is named after him, that we are in Ethan's POV the whole time and never actually go over to Miles's POV again. Or even that necessarily Miles has much to do in all of this. The subject matter, as it is right now, I do not see what relevance Miles or his family would really have on it from where we currently sit. So they may just not show up at all. And there's a part of me that feels like a little bit saddened by that because I've really enjoyed getting to know them and want more. But I also can't help but admit I am really, really curious about this because I just wasn't expecting it to go this way. I was thinking that we were getting another, like, that it was called Ethan of Athos because that was going to be a major character that Miles was working with in the next book, or perhaps even that this would be Miles's latest what's the word I want, alias, I guess. I was going to say nom de plume, and I was like, no, that's not right. He doesn't put anything down in writing if he can help it. So anyway, the way things begin, first of all, I just want to mention the dedication. It says, for those who listened in the beginning, D, Dave, Lori, Barbara, RJ, Wes, and the patient ladies of MAWA. I am so curious who MAWA is. So if y'all have some info on that, I would love to hear about it. But yeah, so this section is all setting up this new planet, which later on somebody makes a joke about how I'm not sure anybody has even heard of us. And I don't remember Athos being mentioned by anybody, so I think they may be onto something with that, actually. But perhaps I'm wrong, I don't know. But Athos, it took me just a bit to realize we are on a planet of exclusively men. And it starts off with a male doctor, with a uterine replicator, a male baby being given only to a father, and all of this they're all hints, but I'm so used to books being written with the male characters being prioritized. I honestly didn't even really clock it right away. I felt a little bit silly afterwards, but I then kind of stopped and was like, no, writing is fucked up, and I was right to not notice it. It just, some shit happens sometimes. So, in summary, what we have here are a group of dudes a planet of dudes who have all been I feel like a religion that demonizes women. And when I say demonizes, I just mean it in the most literal term there is. It is so the way that women are talked about and vilified, it would be amusing if it weren't so pathetic. That's what it comes down to, right? Is like the way that women are treated in a lot of religions. We are simultaneously told that we aren't capable of things, and also told that we are so powerful that we can basically control men entirely. And it's like, well, which is it, baby cakes? Do we have no power or all power? Because you aren't making sense. And alongside that is this like, well, women are the more emotional of the sexes. They are ruled by hormones in a way that men are not. Men are much more rational. But then it's, if a man sees a bare titty, he is no longer in control of his own actions or to be blamed for any of them either. So once again, well, are you the more rational, stronger sex? Or are you a pitiful little creature that is driven solely by your goblin-like instinct for vaginas? Like, which is it? And the conflict here, it's always like just sort of, well, we're strong, but everybody has their weakness, as if, come on. It's just wild because it's always eventually just on our shoulders, the responsibility for it. So the founding fathers, as they are called on this planet, as they are here, they evidently were very, very afraid of women. They made a whole planet where women are not allowed and seen as basically Medusas who can freeze you with a gaze. And also, they desperately need ovaries, or not ovaries, the eggs of ovaries, in order to continue their population, because without women, guess what? Shit don't work. But they don't want to like face what it means. It's a necessary evil is really the energy that like women, the fact that we need anything from them. It's just, one of those unfortunate things that can't be helped, but who knows? God works in mysterious ways, and we sure have no fucking explanation as to why shit works this way. And I just really wanted to kill them a little bit, you guys. The way that again, it would be funny if it weren't so deeply insulting. And it's not like insulting to women even, it's insulting more to men, because this all originates from dudes who feel like they have no control over themselves when it comes to women, but that's our fault. So it's actually men confessing that they are lacking in any sort of self-discipline or control. But once again, that's not their fault, though. That's just how men are. It's nonsense. So anyway, we have to get that out of the way, don't we? Let's begin with the birth, which he manages to pull off flawlessly. Ethan clearly has a lot of skill. And it says Ethan was worried about CJB9. And that, it turns out, is a particular series of cultures, which is what they call them when they are just the ovums, I guess. I never heard them referred to as cultures. Like, when I think of culturing, I think of like a colony of bacteria. So this was sort of an odd way to refer to them that I found confusing at first. But this is the last of a culture that was brought to the planet with the founding fathers, and that everybody was basically prepared like in the hypothetical sense, really. They were prepared for this thing to eventually be non-viable, but they aren't actually prepared in that they haven't shared like far and wide how much of the batch is used up and how few viable births have resulted from it recently. But evidently, this has been considered like the prime culture because the children who are born of it are always more intelligent. And this is one of those things where I'm not really sure. I don't have like data to support this, but this is the way that it's talked about in a later scene. And he seems to argue that it's not as true as it's made to be. But then there's like the question of like, well, what culture were you born from? And he, as a doctor, was indeed born from the culture that this guy is asking for. So there's a sort of like, well, you're protesting, but it seems like the evidence is there. And I don't know whether or not to actually believe him or whether or not I should just interpret his protests as a lead up to the uh sort of blow that he has to deal telling this man that there is none of the culture left. So anyway, that he is like aware that this isn't going to go well. And when he arrives and he checks it out, he realizes like it's just dead. Like this was not viable at all. I read this section twice. And I just really want to mention you guys how incredibly creepy this is. Because when he first comes into the room, I'm just going to read this. Joros waved greeting. How was vacation? Nice. My little brother got a week's leave from his army unit to coincide with it, so we were both home together for a change. South Province. Pleased the old man no end. My brother's got a promotion. He's first piccolo now in his regimental band. And we find out later that he and his brother are fucking. It's not his real brother. It's apparently a foster brother. But he still calls him his little brother, but they have a sexual relationship, but this is evidently quite well known and not seen as strange at all. And y'all, I know that we have just got like a cultural difference happening here, but also I absolutely cannot. I hate this so much. It is deeply creepy. It is so uncomfortable. I just, once I actually like finally it sank in what this guy's relationship is with this brother, the way that my face like drained of color for a moment, it was I didn't nope, don't like this at all. Look, there are points where you can step back and be like, I know that it's frowned upon. The Targaryens did it, but it's still pretty creepy. But also, the Targaryens are just different like that, whatever. But this just feels like so much of the culture otherwise is similar to what I am familiar with that it departing from what I'm familiar with so dramatically in this one sense is really, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. Um, so we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but so this, eventually he is told that this embryo that didn't make it, you are the one who has been assigned to break the news to the father. So we jump into that scene next, and we find out like throughout this, the way that he is described and the work that he is participating in all really points to how hard a worker he is, how passionate he is about what he does, and also how kind of overall conservative he is. Because like at one point there's this description of let's see, He walked into one replicator chamber to find the tech in charge, bopping happily through his duties to the loud and raucous strains of Let's Stay Up All Night, a screechy dance tune currently popular among the undesignated set, blaring out of the Stimu speakers. And the undesignated set, I believe, just means childless. There are men who are designated to become parents, and you have to reach a certain point before that happens. And I think it seems like you also have to like fundraise for it. Um, but here he changes the music to a hymn, literally, before he leaves. So when he goes into this meeting, the guy that he's the father of this fetus that wound up dying, the man was as huge as a bear, red from long days in sun and wind. The hands that turned his cap around and around were thick with muscle and callus. He stared at Ethan. I was expecting an older man, he rumbled. So Ethan apparently is older, but he looks like he's 20 years old, especially because he doesn't have any facial hair. Um, so he has to break the news, and it takes a while for him to get to the point. Honestly, I was getting kind of frustrated with him because this man has been summoned all the way here. Like, he apparently lives at some distance, and coming here is a bit of a project. So already this man is somewhat aware shit's not okay, that there is a problem. But Ethan doesn't just tell him that. He sort of like makes conversation first before finally breaking the news. And I was just like, dude, you have got to just tell this man, and you're keeping him in such, Oh, but the whole point of this conversation is really some exposition. Um, It was the accident last harvest decided me on CJB stock. One of our fellows tangled wrong end to with a thresher, lost an arm. Typical farm accident, but they said if only he'd got to a doctor sooner, they might have saved it. The commune's growing. We're right on the edge of terraforming. We need a doctor of our own. Everybody knows CJBs make the best doctors. Who knows when I'll get enough social duty credits for a second son or a third? I mean to get the best. Not all doctors are CJBs, and most certainly not all CJBs are doctors. What are you, Dr. Urquhart? Well, in fact, I'm a CJB 8. The farmer nodded confirmation to himself. They said you were the best. So, yeah, he explains we don't have any more of this culture left. And this guy, like at first, he thinks that all he is saying is this round didn't work. We'll try again. But when he finds out there's just straight up none left, uh, he thinks that this is here in this facility and that he'll have to travel somewhere else to get them. But it has to be clarified. No, nobody has any more on the planet. Where will we get our doctors, our med techs? The CJB genes are not lost. There are men all over the planet who carried them and who will pass them on to their sons. But what happened to the cultures? Why don't they work anymore? They haven't been poisoned. No, it's perfectly natural. First culture was almost 200 years old. It's just senescent, worn out, used up. I'm going to offer a suggestion. My best medtech is a JJY7. We happen to have a very fine JJY8 culture here. I wouldn't mind having a JJY myself, if only. Ethan cut himself off, lest he tip into a personal bog and wallow in front of this patron. I think you'd be very satisfied. Haas reluctantly allowed himself to be talked into this substitute, and was sent off to the sampling room he had first visited with such high hopes a month before. Ethan sighed, sitting at his desk after the patron had departed, and rubbed the worry around his temples. Every ovarian culture on Athos was a descendant of those brought by the founding fathers. It had been an open secret in the rep centers for 2 years and more. How much longer could it be until the general public picked up on it? And there's also a moment here where he is trying not to say the word woman, and he like realizes like, no, that is the technical term. I need to say it. And that was my first hint at the fact that like, oh wait, women aren't, like I said, there were plenty of hints, but that moment and the way he reacts just to the word, I was like, wow, okay, this is all very different than I was thinking. Um so he gets a call from the chief of staff, DeRoche, who I feel is like not exactly an enemy, but he does seem to be a bit of an antagonist. Like he is somebody that is kind of throwing the shit work in his direction, and it's not like a pettiness. It seems like he really does believe that Ethan is the best person for the job. But he also knows that Ethan isn't going to like it, and so there's a little bit of him that's like amused by doing this. And like I said, I don't think that he's actually like an antagonist, but there is something there that is funny where he is just sort of enjoying needling him, I think. Um so he calls him up and is like, once you're done with what you're doing, come to my office right away. The annual census ship docked yesterday. Mail's here. Your magazines were approved. You've got a year's back issues and one other thing. Finish up and come see. So he finishes what he's doing. L. Baraputra and Sons Biological Supply House, Jackson's Hole. Contents, frozen tissue, human, ovarian, 50 units. Stack with heat exchange unit, clear of obstruction. This end up. So he gets all excited about this. And, the DeRoche is also, when I think of the hunt for suppliers, the scramble for foreign exchange, for a while I thought we were going to have to send some poor son out there personally to get them. Ethan shuddered and laughed. Thank the Father, nobody had to go through that. And unfortunately, Ethan, you will. So Ethan begins to open things up. And he's like, this is sort of weird. What is happening? Because it's all packed up in just plastic baggies. And he compares it to like lunch meat and is thinking, well, maybe they have like a new technology with the way this works, and is sort of doubting his own growing trepidation. Also, I should mention that before he even like starts to open this, he has to wait for things to defrost. And since his promotion to department head last year, his censorship status had been raised to clearance level A. This was the first occasion he'd had to take advantage of it. The first chance to test the maturity and judgment supposed necessary to handle totally uncut, uncensored galactic publications. And so he opens this up, and most of the 24 or so articles dwelt primarily on problems of reproduction in vivo in the human female. Virtuously, he fought down an impulse to peek at them. But there was one article on early diagnosis of an obscure cancer of the vas deferens, and better still, one encouragingly titled, On an Improvement in Permeability of Exchange Membranes in the Uterine Replicator. Ethan called up the entry and read it eagerly. It mostly seemed to involve some fiendishly clever molecular meshing of lipoproteins and polymers that delighted Ethan's geometric reason, at least on the second reading when he finally grasped it. He lost himself for a while in calculations about what it would take to duplicate the work here at Severin. Idly, as he mentally inventoried resources, he called up the author's page. And it turns out that it's two women. One of them, Elizabeth Naismith. I don't know who this is, guys. Does Cordelia have a sister? Is this another daughter? Is this her mother? I don't know anything about her mother and what she does. It may very well be her. Um, and this is so funny the way that he describes them. Two of the strangest faces he had ever seen. Beardless, like men without sons or boys, but devoid of a boy's bloom of youth. Pale, soft faces, thin-boned yet lined and time-scored. The engineer's hair was nearly white. The other was thick-bodied, lumpy, in a pale blue lab smock. If anybody ever called me lumpy, I think I would expire on the spot. I am fat. I am chunky. I am round. You ever use the word lumpy? I am not a bowl of oatmeal, unless you're looking at thickness. I hated it. I really hated it. Ethan trembled, waiting for the insanity to strike him from their level Medusan gazes. Nothing happened. After a moment, he unclutched the desk edge. Perhaps then the madness that possessed galactic men, slaves to these creatures, was something only transmitted in the flesh. Some incalculable telepathic aura. Bravely, he raised his eyes again to the figures on the screen. So, that was a woman. He sought his own reaction. To his immense relief, he seemed to be profoundly unaffected. Indifference, even mild revulsion. The sink of sin did not appear to be draining his soul to perdition on sight, always presuming he had a soul. He switched off the screen with no more emotion than frustrated curiosity. As a test of his resolution, he would not indulge it further today. He put the data disk carefully away with the others. So this is what I'm talking about with the fact that he is like clearly so conservative. Everything about the way that he handles this is him trying to follow the rules and do so in such a way as it's not just like the letter of the law. The spirit of the law is what he, is really attempting to honor here in his actions. And it's like, there's no question that he absolutely believes what he has been taught. And the fact that he is so like, they have clearly just been taught that women in general are a hazard, and has been no real differentiation, it doesn't seem like, in the like talk of what kind of women are the ones that are like really dangerous. For example, they have to be young, they have to be thin, they have to be blonde, or whatever. The way that he seems to understand this, he sees these women and knows that they are older, and there is no thought in his mind that the fact that they are older is going to make them have less of an effect upon his psyche. That doesn't occur to him, which I assume is due to the fact that that is not how he was taught it works. This is just my assumption, but it seems women in general have been explained to him as a problem. And so, as far as he is concerned, no matter their age, all women possess the same power, which is a really fascinating thing when you stop to think about it, because we take it so utterly for granted that younger, thinner women are the ones with the most power, that when you stop and like back away and sort of look at what it could mean if somebody hasn't been told that their whole life, it really is a bit of a shock to understand how much of the preferences that we take for granted are ingrained in a very like purposeful way. So yeah, I just thought this was really like interesting. So this is when he finds the things, and he's like realizing that they're in shrink wrap. Um he was going to have to do the growth culturing personally. Not impossible, he reassured himself. And so he starts to open them, and he realizes something here is not right. And he finally figures out that the one he's looking at is a cow's ovary. The examination was intense and thorough and took all afternoon. When he was done, his laboratory looked like a first-year zoology class had been doing dissections all over it, but he was quite sure. My God, Ethan, what is it? Trash from hysterectomies. Leavings from autopsies, for all I know. A quarter of them are clearly cancerous. Half are atrophied. 5 aren't even human, for God's sake, and every single one of them is dead. Just come look. I don't know what the Population Council paid for this crud, but we've been screwed. So then we have chapter 2, and the Population Council is in a meeting. At first, we've got somebody named Lysands that is trying to be like, maybe it was an accident. And Ethan is like, the fuck it was. You don't get this, get everything. This utterly wrong without it being on purpose. And I love this conversation. How did we pick the supplier anyway? They were the lowest bidder. You put the future of Athos in the hands of the lowest bidder? You all approved it. Remember? You insisted on it, in fact, when you found the next bidder would only send 30 for the same price. 50 different cultures promised for each rep center. You practically peed yourself with glee, as I recall. Let us keep these proceedings official, please, the chairman warned. I really did think that was funny because you know this is exactly how that shit goes. People don't want to spend money and then they act all surprised Pikachu face when shit turns out to be utter garbage. And it's like, you know, to a degree, you can expect like a certain base level of quality just because you're paying money. But honestly, there comes a point where it's sort of like, I feel like this one's on you though, actually. Sorry, but you know, so after some discussion, uh, let's see, here it is. Which rep centers do you want to trade in to pay for them? We and they are the 2 biggest items on the budget. Do you want to stand up and tell people their child allotment is to be halved to give those clowns a pile of toys that produce nothing for the economy in return? Nothing until now, muttered the second speaker cogently. Not to mention the technology we'd have to import, and what, pray tell, are we going to export or pay for? They took all our surplus, so make the jump ships pay for themselves. If we had them, we could export something. It would directly contravene the purpose of the Founding Fathers to seek contact with that contaminated culture. They put us at the end of this long pipeline in the first place, precisely to protect us from... So that's the only like hint we get about this whole thing. But I'm just so deeply curious. What Founding Fathers, who hurt you? These are men who all came off really bad fucking breakups at the same time and decided women are the problem. And they had to be some fucking thick-headed assholes. So I'm just real curious what we're going to learn. And then one of them suggests we could grow some female fetuses of our own. They need not even be brought to term quite. Then raid them for ovarian material and begin again. That is pretty grim stuff. There was a revolted silence around the table. The member from Barca shrank in his seat. The chairman spoke at last. We're not that desperate yet. Although it may be well to have spoken what others will surely think of eventually. It needn't be public knowledge. I should hope not, agreed the chairman dryly. The possibility is noted. Members will mark this section of the record classified, but I point out for all that this proposal does not address the other perennial problem faced by this council, genetic variety. It had not pressed on our generation until now, but we all knew it had to be faced in the future. We would be shirking our responsibilities to ignore it now and let it be dumped on our grandsons in the form of a crisis. They mention immigration, but nobody wants to come to a planet with no women on it, which is unsurprising. Um, Sometimes I wonder if anyone out there has heard of us. Maybe the knowledge is suppressed by, them. Oh my God. You guys, if there were a planet with no women on it, that men who feared and detested women wanted to go to, and it was only populated by them. If you think women wouldn't be walking around with brochures for this fucking place and giving them to every piece of shit man they met, you are out of your mind. This is a dream. Be able to actually put incels all on a fucking spaceship and shoot them into space to just be alone and miserable? How neat and tidy a solution that would be. I mean, that is ideal. The idea that we would suppress the knowledge of this, it's because they just fundamentally misunderstand what the deal is. And so they think that, like, we want the power over men. Like, no, no. Y'all, we don't want you, actually, a lot of the time, like most of the time. This is just. Oh my God, the whole idea. Um, Maybe only a few are allowed to trickle in. It's true, agreed the immigration man. The ones we get tend to be a little, well, strange. I bet they are. I will bet they are. So, we agreed then to pursue our first choice of an off-planet supply. Ethan, still fuming, steamed into speech. Sirs, you're not thinking of going back to those scalpers from some more reputable source. The chairman finished smoothly with an odd look at Ethan. Not disapproval. A sort of smiling, silky smugness. Yes, well, we see later what that is about. So, DeRoche, the ideal purchasing agent must have the technical know-how, and he must be a man of proven integrity, and because of this, like, the whole future of our planet will rest on his good judgment, he must have the moral fiber to resist whatever is out there that he may encounter. And Ethan is thinking that DeRoche is talking about himself and just gassing himself up, which is very funny. So eventually he's like, and it's Ethan that I'm talking about. And Ethan's like totally spaced out. He's like only kind of paying attention because his mind is already wandering. So it takes him a second to even realize that he has been volunteered. And then we jump to him in the car with DeRoche and it's just like, you motherfucker. Well, actually, no. The actual opposite. You fatherfucker. I thought you were the best man for the job. Left to its own devices, God the Father knows what the committee would have picked. Maybe that idiot Franken from Barco. Would you want to put the future of Athos in his hands? No, Ethan began to agree reluctantly, then hardened. Yes! Let him get lost out there. But the social duty credits you'll be getting, think of it. 3 sons, a decade's accumulation in the normal course of events earned in just 1 year? Generous, I think. Ethan had a sudden poignant vision of a hollow cube for his own desk, filled with life and laughter. Ponies, indeed, and long holidays sailing in the sunshine, passing on the subtleties of wind and water as his father had taught him, and the tumble, noise, and chaos of a home teeming with the future. This is so sweet. Like, I am just not somebody who has ever wanted children, so this is often something that's very hard for me to fully understand and appreciate when somebody really, really wants kids. But like the fact that I think what makes this sweeter to me in the context of this planet is that I know the men here do all the labor. So when a man who is in our culture thinks about having children, almost always it's a woman doing most of the work in their imagination. And it's very hard for me to feel warm and fuzzy about that. So it's just a really different thing here because that's not the dynamic. And so I can't help but be like, this is a dude who's like really going to be putting his money where his mouth is, you know? And I just love that. Um, and overall, the fact that the dynamic is what it is still something that I'm going to have to comment on later once I get there. But um, if you'll forgive my frankness, people like your foster brother are just the reason social duty credits may not be transferred. He's a charming young man, Ethan, but even you must admit he's totally irresponsible. He's young. He just needs a bit more time to settle. 3 years younger than you, I believe? Bull. He'll never settle as long as he can sponge off you. I think you'd do a lot better for yourself to find a qualified DA and make him your partner than try to make a DA out of Janos. So, this is like, still, even at this point, it was not sinking in the relationship that they had. And I was sort of just like, also not grasping what DA meant. You know, once I understand like the designated thing after a second read, I was like, oh, that's what he was saying here. So DeRoche dropped Ethan off at the garden apartment he shared with his foster brother and continued on out of town with a reminder of an early start at the rep center tomorrow. Ethan sighed acknowledgement. 4 days. 2 only allowed to orient his chief assistant to his sudden new duties and wind up his own personal affairs. Should he make a will? So much would simply have to be left hanging. He thought suddenly of Brother Haas's JJY son, successfully started 3 months ago. Ethan had planned to personally officiate at his birthday as he had personally seen to his fertilization. Approaching his door, he tripped over Janos' electric bike, dumped carelessly between the flower tubs. Much as Ethan admired Janos' fine, idealistic indifference to material wealth, he wished he'd take better care of his things, but it had always been so. Janos was the son of Ethan's own father's DA. The two had raised all their sons together, as they had run their business together, an experimental and ultimately successful fish farm on the South Province coast, as they had melded their lives together seamlessly. Between son and foster son, no line was ever drawn. Ethan, the eldest, bookish and inquisitive, destined from birth to higher education and higher service. Steve and Stanislaus, born each within a week of the other, each flatteringly bred from their father's partner's ovarian culture stock. Janos, boundlessly energetic, witty as Quicksilver. Brett, the baby, the musical one. Ethan's family. He had missed them achingly in the army, in the school, in his too-good-to-be-passed-up new job at Severin. When Janos had followed Ethan to Severin, eager to trade country life for town life, Ethan had been comforted. No matter that it had interrupted Ethan's tentative social experimentation. Ethan, shy in spite of his achievements, loathed the singles scene and was glad of an excuse to escape it. They had fallen comfortably back into the pattern of their early teenage sexual intimacy. You guys, this was the moment when I was just like, because, like, of course, I'm reading about a planet where it's all men, and I am knowing that a lot of these men are going to be having sex with each other. Whether they are actually really gay or not, if you are not allowed around women, you're going to just make it work. You know what I mean? Like, I would be very curious how many of these dudes are just gay men who are not interested in women and who are like, yeah, I'll go to a planet with all dudes. Fuck yes. And how many of them are just scarred from relationships or are men who hate women. And that's something that I'm extremely curious about when it comes to Ethan going out into the world, because it's possible that women still don't really have an effect on him because they're so strange, and he isn't really like bred, like raised to be attracted to them, that something about this won't quite click. It's also possible that he will be very into women and he'll realize, like, oh, my attraction to men feels like a candle flame compared to the sun, you know? Um, so he goes into the garage and finds that his light flyer is gone. And this was the moment, guys, where I was like, I'm going to hate Janos. I'm really going to hate him. Like, it's one thing for a man to be, not just a man, but any character, to be deeply irresponsible and, somebody who is like difficult. But it's another for somebody who is so cavalier with another person's possessions and just seems to have no real concept of consideration, just simple respect of any kind for the people around them. And Janos, you guys, this is something, y'all. If any of you have listened to the Harry Potter episodes I did with Rashawn back in the day, they're now only for patrons on Patreon because J.K. Rowling is a monster, and I did not want my voice on the airwaves talking glowingly about her after the shit that she has pulled recently. But if you have listened to them, you know that one of the characters that I had the most controversial opinion on was Hagrid. Hagrid is not as bad as Janos in any sense. Hagrid means well, unlike Janos, who truly doesn't seem to care about other people. But Hagrid doesn't fully think things through, and so he can cause a lot of trouble for people. And he can be a very frustrating character due to the fact that he doesn't fully consider the repercussions of things that he is doing or has done. And this is just something that I have a really difficult time with because I am somebody who often considers how things affect other people to a degree that is ultimately not helpful. So the idea of like just giving so little thought is, it's not just alien to me, but it is so incredibly rude that it's difficult for me to fully wrap my brain around. And Janos, like, once he says this, like, that his fucking bike was gone, I was like, oh, okay, that bitch has crashed that shit into a ditch somewhere. And sure enough, that is exactly what has happened, as we find out. Not even a ditch, it's in a tree, we discover later. But we'll get there in a second. So he goes out and tracks him to the spot where there are a bunch of cops. And not only is this in a tree, but it turns out like this wasn't just an unfortunate accident. Janos went out joyriding on this drunk. And just the levels of disregard begin to pile up as you hear more and more of the story. Um, so this thing gets totaled. I mean, utterly. And it took so long for him to save up to buy this thing. Custom built, first fruits of a year's savings from his recently augmented salary. Ethan had owned it all of 2 weeks. So he's like, you guys, he swore, then choked back the oath. He really had intended to let Janos try it once the newness had worn off. Too little grace time left to start an argument over trifles. This is who Ethan is somebody that like gets angry and then stops himself and seems to kind of feel bad and guilty about the fact that he is angry and wants to kind of do a take back seas and, well, and justify it somehow, just create some sort of rationalization why being angry isn't totally fair, why what Janus did isn't totally gross and thoughtless. Just all of the sort of mental gymnastics that he does to make this seem less awful than it is. It is deeply frustrating to read. And this is the sort of thing that, like, Owen has a friend like this who puts up with so much shit, and they do the same, like, mental gymnastics as well. And it's really hard, you guys, because, like, I can appreciate that, yes, you were raised in such a way that you do not value yourself, that you were taught not to let yourself be angry, and that you are meant to be a helpmeet. All of this can be true, but I find her so difficult to be around because she has so many chances to do something to make her situation better and to draw boundaries, and she doesn't do it. And again, I completely understand that just drawing a boundary because you can, that it's not that easy and it's not that simple. And I know that intellectually, but so many of her problems are things that could be, in quotes, easily fixed. And I say easily because I understand it's not really, but they have simple answers. And I just want to slap and shake her sometimes because she puts up with so much shit and it's so unnecessary, and it just makes her life harder, even though she is putting up with it because she thinks that's making her life easier. And so Ethan is really giving that energy for me. And I, at this point, was already so angry, like, on his behalf. And once I realized that he was going to try and not be angry, I began to get more mad, like to compensate, basically. So he goes to the police station where Janos has been arrested. We find out later that the credits that Janos has earned are what he used to pay to bail himself out so that Ethan doesn't have to pay it. And even though I'm sure he thinks of this as like, now you're not having to spend your money. Ultimately, all this means is that he has to lean on Ethan even more than he did. So overall, there's this conversation, you guys, this made me so angry. When he tries to explain how he crashed, Ethan attempts to fill in the blanks by being like, well, I guess it was dark. And he's like, oh, it was before dark. Why weren't you at work? It was your fault, really. If you hadn't left before dawn on that joy junket to the Capitol, I wouldn't have overslept. The fact that he manages to blame Ethan, and Ethan says, I reset the alarm. This is the behavior I'm talking about. This is what I'm saying. No, don't reset the alarm. Let him be late. Let him get fired. Let him do everything that ruins his life and wash your hands of him so that he has to cope with the consequences. But Ethan cannot do that. He is over here basically raising this guy like he's his child. And it's just pitiful. There's just, the man-child quality. I've been recently, anybody out there who has Netflix and is looking for something really compelling to watch that's different than probably a lot of the other stuff that you have come across, may I suggest, I can't remember his name. I think it's, oh my God, I'm sorry guys, because the name of the show is Kevin Can Fuck Himself. That's what it is. Kevin. I couldn't remember the husband's name. And the premise of the show, it starts off when you open, like the first scene opens like a very traditional 3-camera sitcom set. And there's like a cool girl hanging out with her brother who is a big oaf. And the brother's best friend, who is Kevin, the husband, and they're playing beer pong. And his wife walks in and gets hit with one of the balls that they're playing with, and it's a little laugh line. And the scene sort of escalates in typical sitcom fashion, where something zany happens and a piece of furniture or a vase or something breaks. And then all of a sudden, she leaves the room and she is in a totally different camera setting, much more prestige television, like a Breaking Bad vibe. And there's no laugh track anymore. The coloring is much more ordinary and not as heightened. Lighting, totally different. And she is gripping the sides of the laundry basket that she was carrying and trying not to have a nervous breakdown. So basically, the premise of the show is a typical sitcom wife who has to put up with all kinds of absolute trash behavior from her man-child husband. What if she began to have enough? What if she were a real person that lived this life and began to be like, I can't do this anymore? And what would it look like? And what kind of behavior could a character like that husband carry out before it starts to become outright abusive? The things that we have been taught to find like wacky and funny about a lot of sitcoms are almost always men behaving really badly and women being the like responsible ones that clean up after them. And it's just interesting to me how this relationship is two men, but we still kind of have that dynamic going on. And I'm not saying that dynamic always has to be there. I'm just saying that it did make me kind of laugh because it's like, wow, it's still happening. Like, there's even poor Ethan can't get away with it. Janos can fuck himself. Um, so the reason that he got fired, he tries to make it sound like I got fired because I was late, but it turns out he took a swing at his boss. And so that's really why he got like carried out and tossed on his ass. And it takes so long for Ethan to clock what's happening here because like, Ethan, sir, this man is absolute bottom tier on all of his behavior. Bottom. Um, but he is like everything that he tells you, it's the worst of any of the options that you thought of. It's so bad actually that it's not even an option that had occurred to you. So the fact that he's just like, well, he can't just fire you for being late. I'm like, this man did not get fired for being late, Ethan. Wake up. He did something really fucking stupid. Just wait for him to finish telling you. And indeed, that is the truth. So, they leave finally. They get home. Janos is trying to avoid conversation. And then when they get home, I loved this detail. Janos goes and grabs a beer and it says hair of the dog. Want one? He offered slyly. Ethan refused to be baited into a diversionary lecture on Janos' drinking habits. Clearly the intent. Yeah. Janos raised surprised eyebrows and tossed him a bulb. So, it's so frustrating because he's just like, I can't leave you with a baby all day if you're going to go on like this. Hell, Ethan, who's asking you to? I got no time for the little shit factories. They cramp your style. Well, not your style, I suppose. You're the one who's all hot for paternity, not me. Working at that center overtime has turned your brain. You used to be fun. Janos, apparently recognizing he had crossed the line of Ethan's amazing tolerance at last, was retreating toward the bathroom. And Ethan here does start to get mad enough that he's just like, you just don't care about anybody but yourself. You can have the light flyer when I leave. Janos paused, shocked white. Leave? Ethan, I never meant... Oh, not that kind of leave. This has nothing to do with you. And he explains that he's going to be gone a year. Now who doesn't care, said Janos angrily. Off for a year without so much as a buy or leave? What about me? What am I supposed to do while you're... Ethan, isn't Jackson's Hole a planet out there with them on it? I leave in 3 days on the galactic census ship. You can have all my things. I don't know what's going to happen out there. Janos' chiseled face was drained sober. In a small voice, he said, I'll go clean up. Comfort at last, but Ethan was asleep in his chair before Janos came out of the bathroom. And that is the end of chapter 2. So yeah, I hate Janos. I hope that Ethan being away for a year does something. A year is just long enough that it might actually have some sort of material effect, but only maybe. You know, like leaving somebody and letting them get a taste of what life is when somebody isn't wiping their ass all the time. It's a real sort of 50-50. A person could either get brought, like, wised up, or they could just find another person to mooch off of, you know, another person to fucking take care of them. And the person that he was with when he crashes is somebody that Ethan thinks to himself he had been considering maybe Janos had like a thing on the side with. I'm trying to find the spot where he thinks about this, because let's see. Did you find your flyer? Blah blah blah. I've paid the bill. Okay, let's see. You reset the alarm. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to find the spot. Um it's him getting fired, but like the talk kind of goes in an order that isn't. There were charges. Didn't they give you some severance pay? Not exactly out. Let's go home. Yeah, I can't find the spot here where he says who he was with. Um, and the, the let's see. Oh, uh, I've paid the bill for the tree. Damage there too. Oh, that's right. I forgot the tree is like 200 years old and got split all the way down the middle. So Ethan may not have had to pay to bail his brother out, but he does have to pay for the damages to the tree. Um, let's see. You see, we found we could tumble and make a close pass. They'd go whipping around like a whirligig, just like flying a fighter and dive bombing the enemy. Athos had possessed no military enemies in 200 years. So he's like playing out this little fantasy here, I guess. Um, maybe it was before. No, I can't find it, guys. I'm sorry. There's somebody that he says by name that he had been hanging out with. I could have sworn. And that Ethan thinks to himself that if he were more paranoid, he would have thought Janos had a thing with him on the side. And I can't find the spot. That's so weird. But maybe if all of this to say that, like, if Janos doesn't actually, here it is, Nick, thank God. In his darker and more paranoid moments, Ethan occasionally suspected Janos of having something on the side with him. Interesting. So it's not exactly a total like, oh, sometimes I worry about it, but I know it's not true. It's like, sometimes I worry about it and I don't have time to think about that right now because there's a bigger problem. So Nick doesn't sound like somebody that would be able to take care of Janos, though. He sounds like somebody who would fuck up just as bad, and the two of them would both be in the clink together eventually, you know? So anyway, I'm not even going to try and worry about who's going to watch Janos because I'm excited for Ethan to get off planet. Hopefully next episode we'll find out. All right, everybody. Thank you again so much for listening. Love you very much. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.